In the world of man-made materials, there are those that are labeled as miraculous. But it hit a deadly curse. Asbestos, once referred to as the magic fiber for its fire-resistant properties, heat insulation, and exceptional durability. It has infiltrated every corner of modern life, from skyscrapers to the homes of every family. But behind its useful appearance lies a terrifying truth. A silent killer, spreading deadly diseases after decades. At the beginning of the 20th century, the world was undergoing a rapid and dramatic transformation. Cities rose skyward, and factories sprang up. And to feed that thirst for progress, humanity dug deep into the earth, searching for hidden treasures. And they found something even more precious than gold. A strange mineral fiber, as soft as silk, as strong as stone, a miracle of nature. It doesn't burn in fire, isn't corroded by chemicals, and doesn't decay over time. The ancient Greeks, the first to recognize its power, gave it a perfect name, indestructible. And then, the Industrial Revolution turned it into the backbone of the modern world. It is the protective skin of skyscrapers, the insulating heart of power plants. It is the armor for warships, and for the firefighters too. Wherever there is progress, there is asbestos. It is a symbol of strength and safety. From the mines in Canada to the factories in the United States, the asbestos industry boomed. It didn't just produce products. It created jobs. It built towns. And it fostered a powerful belief in a better future. And then that miracle material found its way into every corner of everyday life. The industry sold us a promise, not just of buildings, but of homes. A promise of absolute safety, packaged in colorful advertisements. We lived with it, worked with it, slept beneath a roof made of it, and trusted it completely. It became the silent, invisible guardian of millions of families. And this is where that promise was made. In these clouds of white dust, no one saw the danger. They saw bread for their families, a future for their children. It was the visible proof of hard work and what it could achieve. It was the breath of prosperity, the breath of a future they believed would never end. But in the symphony of machinery and progress, a discordant note began to sound, growing louder with each passing day. It wasn't the cough of a common cold. It was a dry, relentless cough, a sound that had become all too familiar in factory towns. They called it by many names. In the mines, it was stone lung. In the factories, the workshop cough. But at its core, it was always the same, the silent price quietly accepted in exchange for steady work. They accepted it because they had no other choice. They accepted it because no one told them the terrible truth behind that soft, white dust. This is Nellie Kershaw. She was just a girl when she began working at the Turner Brothers Asbestos factory in Rochdale. Like her mother and her sisters, her life was woven into the rhythm of the looms and the threads of asbestos. For 2 decades, she worked tirelessly, but day by day an invisible enemy was building up inside her body. Her job was to spin raw asbestos fibers into thread, a task that demanded both skill and patience. But it was also one of the dustiest and most dangerous steps in the process. Day after day, she breathed in the thick air, heavy with the white dust the bosses proudly called the magic fiber, In 1922, after nearly 20 years of work, Nellie's body began to betray her. Unable to continue working, she turned to her doctor, Walter Joss. Dr. Joss refused to accept that her condition was merely a common cough. After examining her condition, he noticed something unusual. He connected her symptoms to the work she had done all her life and realized it was the cause of her illness. He wrote directly to the factory, stating that her disease was caused by occupational exposure. In the letter sent to Turner Brothers, he didn't just describe her medical condition. He provided a clear diagnosis: the pulmonary fibrosis was caused by inhalation of asbestos fibers. He demanded that the factory take responsibility.
I write this letter as the attending physician of Mrs. Nellie Kershaw, who has worked at your factory for nearly 2 decades. After a thorough clinical examination and extensive testing, I have concluded that her severe pulmonary fibrosis is not a common illness, but is directly linked to prolonged exposure to asbestos dust in your working environment. The chronic respiratory symptoms, combined with the widespread damage to her lung tissue that I have observed, are entirely consistent with the effects of inhaling this mineral fiber. This is not a coincidence. This is a consequence. I urge your company to take responsibility for your workers, not only for Mrs. Nellie Kershaw, but for all those who silently breathe in this deadly dust every single day.
He named the culprit outright. But to Turner Brothers, this wasn't the cry for help of a suffering patient. It was a threat to their business. And in a closed boardroom, among suits and cigar smoke, a decision was made. A decision cold, ruthless, and entirely calculated. They chose profit. They said no. And with that decision, they sentenced Nellie Kershaw to death. Her final 2 years were a living hell. Abandoned by the company to which she had given her youth. Ignored by a legal system that didn't even have a name for her disease. Every breath was a battle. Every day, a reminder of betrayal. She died on March 14, 1924 in poverty and obscurity. Dr. Joss's persistence led to an autopsy. And what Dr. William Cook discovered shook the medical world. Her lungs weren't just damaged, they were invaded. For the first time in history, the killer was given a scientific name: asbestosis. That name escaped the laboratory. It became a headline, a public scandal. The British government could no longer look away. The 1930 Meriwether Report was a bombshell. It confirmed everything Dr. Joss had claimed, and more. It was undeniable proof. A stark warning that the industry was selling a killer. A new law was passed, but it was a law written by those at fault, filled with loopholes, frail in enforcement. It was crafted to appear as action, but was, in truth, a delay. A stage performance, designed to soothe the public. And so, while politicians and executives congratulated themselves, nothing truly changed on the factory floor. The deadly dust still hung in the air, and the coughing never stopped. Nellie's story could have ended there, buried with her. But the dead sometimes tell the most powerful stories. The Nellie Kershaw warning and the Meriwether Report were there. But for the asbestos industry, it wasn't a call for change. It was a declaration of war. And they responded, not with transparency, but with an iron curtain of silence and deceit. A campaign carefully and systematically orchestrated to bury the truth. During the 1930s and 1940s, internal documents, later known as the Sumner-Simpson Papers, revealed a conspiracy calculated down to the finest detail. The company's lawyers advised one another. It's best to say nothing about asbestos. Executives were instructed not to inform workers they were dying. They knew. They knew everything, and they chose to hide it. While hiding the truth, they launched a charm offensive on the public. The propaganda machine roared to life, selling a dream of safety and modernity, a perfect performance. But their most powerful weapon wasn't advertising. It was science. They built their own research institutes. They funded scientists, the kind willing to deliver the results they wanted to hear. The goal was never to find the truth. It was to create doubt, to sow uncertainty, and they succeeded. But there was one truth they couldn't control, a truth quietly emerging in hospitals across the world. Doctors began to document a rare, extremely aggressive, and almost always fatal cancer. It wasn't like asbestosis. It was worse. They called it mesothelioma. This is its cruelty, the biological time bomb. A person can be exposed for only a short time and show no symptoms for 20, 30, even 50 years. And then, when they've retired, when they're playing with their grandchildren, it awakens. The unmistakable signature of asbestos. To the corporations, they were numbers on a balance sheet, calculated risks. But to thousands of families, they were time bombs, ticking away in the chests of the people they loved. They didn't just sell a product. They sold a lie, and the cost of that lie was measured in human lives. For thousands of workers, the happiest moment of the day was when the factory whistle blew. They returned home, to the arms of their wives and the laughter of their children. They thought they had left the danger behind, back at the factory gates. But they brought the enemy home with them, an unwelcome guest, invisible and deadly, clinging to their hair, their skin, and every thread of their work clothes. It was called secondary exposure, a cold medical term for a tragedy beyond words.
Every day after work, I'd see my husband's clothes covered in dust, and I thought simply they just needed to be washed.
The wives, who washed those clothes, unknowingly breathed in clouds of toxic dust. The children, wrapped in their father's embrace, inhaled the deadly fibers. Without a clue, they were breathing in death. They never set foot in the factory, but their death sentence was signed all the same, in the one place that should have been safe, their own home.
Every time my father came home, he would hug us and kiss us. It was the best feeling. I just wish he had never worked at that factory.
But the spread didn't stop at the embraces. It extended to every living space in the home. For decades, asbestos factories released tons of toxic waste into the air, the soil, and the water, unchecked and uncontrolled. For the communities living in the shadow of those smokestacks, asbestos was the air they breathed, the soil their children played in. It settled on every surface, a toxic snowfall in the middle of summer. Look at Whitnum, Australia, a town built on a blue asbestos mine, where children once slid down piles of waste, believing it was snow. Most of those children grew up with illness and declining health. Their families saw the danger from the asbestos mines and left their hometown behind. Today, Whitnum is a ghost town, too toxic to inhabit, a scar on the map of Australia. Or Libby, Montana, in the United States, where an asbestos-contaminated vermiculite plant poisoned an entire town for decades. Hundreds have died. Thousands more carry the disease within them. This is no longer an occupational disease. It is a slow, motion environmental massacre, carried out on a massive scale. And even if you didn't live near a factory, you were not safe. Because the industry brought its deadly legacy into the places we trusted most.
How could we live in such polluted air? No precautions, no warnings from the authorities. The only way we could protect ourselves was to leave our homeland behind.
Millions of schools, hospitals, and public buildings were constructed using asbestos-containing materials. Ceilings, floor tiles, insulation around pipes, all of it hiding a ticking time bomb. As these materials age, become damaged, or are disturbed, they release deadly asbestos fibers into the air. Teachers, students, doctors, patients. They became unsuspecting victims of an exposure they couldn't see, couldn't smell, and couldn't avoid.
It's horrifying. I never thought I would get lung cancer. The most heartbreaking thing isn't that I myself was unhealthy. The cause turned out to be the very kitchen I cooked in every day, the very walls that made up my home.
For decades, the asbestos industry triumphed through silence. They relied on the fear, ignorance, and exhaustion of their victims.
Just keep quiet. As long as money flows into our company's pockets, we'll spend a small amount to resolve those issues. No need to worry. We can shut up all the victims just by using money.
But they didn't anticipate one thing: the power of those who have nothing left to lose. When pain turns into rage, lonely voices begin to rise. Screams from the silence. They are the sick workers, the widows, the idealistic young lawyers. They decided that it was time to fight. But it was an unequal fight. On one side was David, with truth as his only weapon. On the other was the giant Goliath, with an army of lawyers, endless financial resources, and a single strategy: delay, deny, and exhaust the opponent until they give up. But they didn't give up, and then a crack appeared in the wall of lies. His name was Clarence Borrell, an insulation worker in Texas. His lawsuit in 1969 became a historical landmark. He filed a lawsuit in federal court against an asbestos manufacturer in 1969. He had contracted asbestosis and malignant lung tumors due to working with asbestos insulation materials for over 30 years. He argued that the manufacturer was at fault because they knew, or should have known, about the dangers of asbestos and should have warned about these dangers. A manufacturer concealed company health examination results from employees found to have asbestos-related diseases. Asbestos manufacturers also refused to allow government agencies to conduct inspections and safety surveys unless these agencies agreed to keep their findings and conclusions confidential. Additionally, manufacturers pressured medical researchers to delay the publication of their investigation results and to alter their conclusions. The court declared that asbestos manufacturers were not only liable for their products, but also responsible for failing to warn about dangers they had known about for decades. It was a legal bombshell. The floodgates were opened.
A landmark ruling has shaken the global asbestos industry, holding manufacturers accountable not only for their products, but also for failing to warn consumers about deadly risks they had known about for decades. This decision has unleashed a powerful wave of litigation, permanently changing the landscape of corporate responsibility.
After the Borrell ruling, a wave of litigation hit. Tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of victims stood up to demand justice. Corporations once considered untouchable now faced a legal firestorm. The wall of silence had crumbled.
The lawsuit sent shockwaves through the global asbestos industry. Faced with a massive number of lawsuits from victims, the billion-dollar companies had another plan.
In 1982, Johns Manville, the largest and most powerful corporation, did something no one expected. It filed for bankruptcy. That was not a surrender. It was a cunning legal strategy. By declaring bankruptcy, they could temporarily halt all lawsuits against them and consolidate their debts into a single entity. They have created trust funds to compensate current and future victims. But for many, it is a delayed and inadequate form of justice. The war did not stop in American courtrooms. It spread globally. Activists, labor unions, and victims from all over the world joined forces, transforming a personal struggle into a global movement. They weren't just demanding compensation. They were demanding something much bigger, a complete ban, so that no one else would suffer the same fate. The compensation amounts are just a small fraction of the enormous profits they have made, and compared to the pain they have caused. The corporations have found ways to survive, while thousands of victims continue to die.